Hey guys, welcome back to the live streams. I know it's been a while since I've been on here, but I'm excited about today's chat because it's going to be super casual, and I'm talking to one of my dear friends, Dr. Margie Serrato, about energy upgrades.
That's
How you doing,
definitely
my
what we
friend?
planned. We'll see.
Well, I mean, I wanted to talk about it because I know this is something that you and I have been, right, messaging and texting. Other friends of mine are having issues. I've gone through something, but nobody's really talking about it outside of the overall, like, upgrades. Like, you'll have headaches or maybe you'll get tired, but, like, I'd like to know, like, what are individual people going through?
All right.
So let's start with you. What have you been experiencing these last few weeks?
Oh man. I feel like there's different ways of talking about my experience. All of our experiences, right? But for me, I always feel like there's the what is coming up for me in my knowing.
Hmm.
What is so and let's just give a little explanation to that. One of the things that I've learned that I feel like is really important to understand is that we all have different ways of tuning into ourselves and the world around us, right?
Right.
And it's actually through Rebecca Campbell that I love her explanation of this. It made sense to me that we tune into ourselves and the world around us in different ways. For me personally, we I think the one that we've heard about the most is clairvoyance,
Yes.
right? It's the clear seeing, which we think about it in terms of like prophetic kind of like context of like seeing the future, and it can be for someone, um, but it could be the way that you experience a different kind of knowing, right? Visions or dreams, or like it can come in lots of different ways. Clairsentience,
Yep.
which is the clear feeling, right? If you think of that, I think that the easiest for people to connect to understand is intuition.
Hmm.
Is a clairsentience, right? It's something that you feel, that gut feeling, or maybe you feel it somewhere else, but it's a feeling. That it's a feeling, that it's a clear feeling of something is here, and I don't know what it is. Maybe you have learned to tune into like what exactly is it, how it presents itself. But for me, like clairsentience is a pretty big one. Probably the one that I'm the strongest in
Hmm.
for myself. Clear audience, right,
Hmm.
is what you hear. For some people, that could be a voice. And listen, we can talk about this in terms of how we understand now certain things and what we have learned, how we have learned to feel towards these things, not in a clear sentience way, but the things that we have learned to judge about
Right.
what these things mean, right? And so if you think about hearing things, right, what's the first thing that comes? Oh, psychosis, right? It's the abnormal stuff. It's the something is wrong with the person. It's schizophrenia. It's any number of things, right? It's the way that we've learned to see it. But clear audience can be a voice that you hear,
Hmm.
whether it's another voice in yourself, whether it's a voice of somebody outside of you. Clear audience can also be, for me, the way that I experience it, especially if I'm not listening to my clear sentience, and the universe is trying to tell me something, or guides. I don't know who it is, because the truth is like I'm learning, right? We're
Right.
always learning. But for me, the clear audience feels like this blaring, somebody's screaming at me from a different dimension, and you need to fucking listen.
But is
Like
it
that.
actually like a voice, or is it like I'll get like a really loud ringing noise in my ear when I need to pay attention at a certain moment? It'll be like overly loud.
Yeah. No, I feel like for me, it's like this. It's like it sounds like a whisper, but it feels like a blaring.
Right.
Like somebody's energy, if they're like trying to like really get you to listen to something.
Yeah.
But what I hear is a whisper. Fortunately, because I think if I heard it like blaring, that might be a little scary. So I'm glad that it does not translate that way into my ear. So there's that. Um, there's the clear knowing. So
Yeah.
it's not a right. It's not a feeling. It's a for me and the clear knowing. I feel like it's for me. It's like it comes as much like in my and say like in a different part of my brain, or maybe like it's the third eye. I don't know, because again I'm learning these things, so I don't know exactly what it means for me. I can tell you how it feels for me, but also like here
Really?
in my chest. For me, it's like this knowing feels like it's up here, as well as it is up here. So I don't know like what kind of connection there is. For some people, is clear gustance, so they actually taste things, and it's really interesting. That is not one that ever comes up for me. There was only one experience um, where it was like tasting the truth.
Hmm. Mm.
Uh, and that was pretty interesting because that required medicine. So it's not one that I'm strong in.
We
And
only
it's
are usually, and I think I shared this with you. When I went and got certified, they taught us you have three of your top clairs. There's five, I think, total.
yes, there's five exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that you can go. Like taste is not one of them, which is funny because I have no taste in general. But smelling, knowing, and I think there's even an environmental one
Oh,
where you can
interesting.
have prophesize, or environments can really hone in. And it's interesting that your clear knowing comes here because mine's in my gut.
Okay.
Like I feel it in my gut. It's like I know what I know and I just know it. And
Okay.
I can't give you rational
Yeah.
explanation as to why I know it, but I feel it and I know it so strongly in my gut that it's like, no, that's it.
Interesting. Okay. So for you, your knowing is there. For me, the feeling is there. That's really interesting, right? That's different. But that's part of like learning to distinguish, and really tune in into like what are the different things that are showing up and how.
In our bodies, right?
Um,
And I think that's
yeah.
key because I always tell people with their intuition, like you got to work with your own body. In fact, I just did this with my group yesterday for human design
Okay.
because we were going through the splenic center.
Ah.
And that's intuition and fear and gates, and I told them, what your intuitive insight might be totally different than my intuitive insight,
Right.
but you've got to get to know your body and how it speaks to you. And if you don't have those quiet moments, you won't know.
Yes, absolutely. And then yes, so you just mentioned the other one was the olfactory one. So
Mhm.
it's all sensory, right? It's
Yes.
just how it shows up for you in your own body, how you tune into that. And there is like like you said, the environmental one, which for me, um, it depends on where I am or who I'm with. That one also feels very true because some of it feels like you're, at least for me, like my clairsentience and clear knowing, it feels very inside of me, but there
Hmm.
are also times or situations where it is outside of me, and being tuned in into, best way that I can describe it is, so in coaching, so I did coaching training, through the Coactive Training Institute, and they call it global listening, right?
Oh.
It's tuning into what is outside of you happening at the same time that you're in this situation that is supporting the situation that you're in. Okay, so I have one. I have one because it just happened. It just happened on Monday, and it was super awesome. I don't actually know if I told you, but I feel like this is the one that wants to be released right now. So, all right, there's a spot where I am. It's 5 minutes drive from where I am. It's like this most magical little spot. It's an overlook into New Mexico Canyon and the Rio Grande. It's like
Hmm.
the most gorgeous thing. And I've ever since I moved here, because I moved here end of March, um, I've been going to this spot, and I recognize that it's just a place where It's just beautiful. I feel so at peace and just listening to the rush of the river, hearing the birds, hearing the coyotes, whatever is happening in the environment. It just feels so lovely to have. There's a little waterfall sometimes that's there, so it's tuning into my listening
Hmm.
is feels like really important because it's a place where I can hear different things in nature at the same time, and then start tuning in into what am I hearing on this side, what am I hearing over here, kind of tilt my head a little bit and go, what am I hearing now, and then just tuning into the things around me, right? So that feels like such a good spot to be able to do that. What I hadn't connected to that required like a visualization meditation exercise is there's a question in this meditation that was, what is this place telling you about yourself?
Mm.
And I was like, it felt so obvious when I asked the question and the answer that came up, but I hadn't connected those things consciously, cognitively, right? But it made so much sense. I was like, oh, it's feeding this part of myself that's really important, which is expansiveness. Because I see it's like the canyons and the mountains and the river and it's like the whole perspective that I get from there is this bigness of the world.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, that kind of makes total sense. I hadn't thought about that. Ah, okay, yeah, it's connecting to this really important part of myself that is expansive and that wants to keep expanding, right? It makes sense. So the river has been calling to me really strongly, especially like this past week. It's a little bit yelling at me at this point of like, so on Monday it was like the weather change here. There was fog, right, that was just coming out from like the river. It was the most beautiful sight. I have to post a video of it. And so if you can imagine, it's like the river, but it's almost like clouds like over the river. It's just like the most gorgeous scene. And there was this one spot that was kind of calling my attention, and I was like, okay, I recognize that I'm tuning into things um, that are that are just calling to me. And so there's this one particular spot, and I was looking at it, and it felt like it's trying to tell me something. Is what it felt like, right? And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pay attention to this one spot, see what happens. And I was getting, how when you look at the clouds, you see, people see different shapes, different things,
Yeah.
right? It's the way that your brain and your eyes is making sense of information. We can rationalize that in that way. And I caught myself doing this of like, oh, I'm seeing what I'm seeing because my brain is trying to make sense of it. It's like, yes, that's my own individual brain. My brain is not the same brain as somebody else's brain. My meaning making is not the same as somebody else's meaning making. So I have to remind myself that my go-to as a human being, right, the way that we've learned to make sense of things, is like, oh, I'm so smart, I can make sense of this in my brain. And it's like, yeah, and you know that that's not the only thing, right? That there
Hmm.
are other things that you may not understand but still matter for you to explore and be okay with, even if you don't know what they mean or how they work. So I was looking at this, and it was like the way that it was evaporating. It was telling me something very clear, which is like, ask questions of the mountains and the river. And I was like,
Mm.
well, that feels very clear. All right, what should I ask first? Like immediately my brain is like, ooh, like how can I test this, right? And so I was like, okay, what do I want to ask? And I was like, okay, since again, like the river has been calling to me really strongly, I was like, okay, am I meant to learn something important at the
Mm.
river? I just took a deep breath, sat with it, and not even like 30 seconds later, this flock of western bluebirds started flying around me. the ways in which my brother um, comes to me. Like I feel his presence through bluebirds. I have a blue jay tattoo on my back, which I'm gonna since we have this I can show you a little bit. Yeah. So, and when I change environments where there aren't any blue jays, it's a bluebird of some sort that shows up.
Mhm.
So since I've been here, I know that bluebirds are him kind of just saying hi. I have never seen that many bluebirds in a single day. I've never seen them in a flock. So for me, that was a very clear, okay, yeah, I'm listening, got it, right? And again, I think it's as human beings, we have learned to be so disconnected from the environment around us
Mhm.
that it's so easy to go, oh, that's just a coincidence. You can choose to see it that way, or you can choose to see it as synchronicity, as there's something that is happening for you in this moment that I understand might be hard to accept because you don't understand it, because you haven't learned how to accept it or how to see it as true. That
Mhm.
doesn't make it less true.
No.
And so for me, I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to the river. Right? Like,
But you brought up a point that I think some people struggle with is right. So the river was calling to me, and it's been calling to me even more. And that's something I know I found when we ignore the calls or the signals, and they kind of get stronger. But a lot of people will be like, well, what do you even mean by that?
okay, I'll tell you what it feels like to me. Because for me,
Right.
it's a very clear feeling.
Hmm.
It feels like a gravitational pull. It feels like and this happens with people too, even when I don't want it to happen. The people that I feel like like the universe, spiritual guides, whatever. And I'm not saying that dismissively. I'm saying whatever because I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's both, right? Maybe it's the universe
Hmm.
and your guides or somebody else's guides that feel like they want you to connect with this person, or the universe is telling you there's something for you to learn by connecting with this person, or maybe it's you know your soul family that you're connected to. Like it could be so many different things. I personally don't know what that is yet, how to understand it in a way that feels organized. I just know that it is something, and that's all I need to know, right? That's all I need to kind of tune into. And so it feels like a gravitational pull. There are certain people that I'm connected to, and that feeling feels so familiar, especially when it comes to like romantic relationships,
Hmm.
um, or loving relationships, that it feels like this thing that's pulling to me even before I maybe have, which has happened recently, before I even saw the person. I
Hmm.
felt this pull to like this that I just didn't know, like, where is this coming from? Where is it guiding me to, right? And I kind of like feel like I'm like trying to like point my compass like to where it's pulling me. And then it's like, oh, that person. Do I want this right now in my life, right? And so, or same thing like with the river. I'm like, it feels like that gravitational pull is even more of like, come to the river. And the more that I resist it, the more that feels like you need, like it wants to draw me in. So that's how I experience it. So I'm curious how you experience the calling.
It's interesting. It depends because I feel so connected to the environment in general. I know a lot of my friends make fun of me because I'm always having animals show up and everything. So for me, I actually end up getting the I'll meet people that I'm like, oh, okay, I mean, I'm sure everybody can relate to this, where you meet somebody and you just click. Like you feel like you've known each other forever. And yet you've just met or you don't really know them, but yet you feel like you have. I think that it would be the easiest way I could describe it for somebody who's never experienced something. It's that feeling of paying attention to like, oh, okay, like you said, I'm supposed to know this person for whatever reason. But then I also have the opposite feelings, which happen to me more, I would say, than the pulling is the pushing. Like I remember having an experience where this person moved here years ago and everybody loved this person, but I didn't. There was just this feeling of like, no, do not engage. And I was like, what, and I've had this happen several times in my life where I ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
I had it in hiring an assistant manager and it bit me in the ass. You know what I mean? Like I've had to learn that was how my intuition was really teaching me by the opposite of like, don't do this. You know what I mean? I think because I'm so just naturally intuitive in that way that I had to learn and discern it from that way. So I've had a lot of people where, and I struggled with that for a while because I'm like, everybody loves this person. Like everybody's like, they're amazing. You know, and they never did anything personally.
Mommy!
Right. You know, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, why do I have an issue with this person? And it wasn't even an issue. It's just, I just didn't want to be around them.
Yeah.
And later it got shown to me why. This thing came up with after my brain injury and an art auction and all that, and they showed their other side, and I was like, oh,
Mm.
that's why I'm not supposed. And they ended up burning a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
And so but at the time, to your point, I had no facts. I had no reason not to like this person, but it was strong to go, steer clear. And so now I've learned over many mistakes where I've ignored that
Mm-hmm.
to trust that gut instinct of no, like don't go that way, don't go this person, don't do these things, even if I don't know why. And like I said, even if the person isn't showing any bad behavior, I just know my energy does not want to mix with theirs for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
or my energy doesn't want to go to that area for whatever reason.
Yeah, I uh,
So
I I feel that. Like, there's definitely times when there's some resistance, and interestingly, that one feels easier for me to listen to than the blaring gravitational pull one.
for me,
Apparently,
it was opposite. I feel easier with the blaring gravitational pull than the don't go there because I think I
okay.
innately want to, and I was told this years ago by a tarot reader in Asheville. Um, Shout out to all the blessings to Asheville right now, one of my dearest towns. And she told me, she told me that years ago, and I didn't know what she was talking about. She said, "Listen, you can see the very best in the worst in humanity. You
Mm,
can see the best in people where people don't even see the best." But she's like, your work in that is these people will come to you and some will listen and take guidance and some will want you to do the work for them and they'll suck from you. And she's like, you're going to have to discern,
yeah.
right, the difference. And at the time, and she's like, it's going to be hard because you're going to draw really good people, but you're going to draw really crappy people because you can always see the good, even when people would look at you and go, oh my God, how could you see the good in that drug addict, let's say? She's like, you can, but you have to understand that you can't do the work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be one of your biggest lessons. And like I said, that was probably, God, 10, 20 years ago that I had that reading. And it stuck with me and I never understood it until probably I would say the last, before my brain injury 10 years ago,
Yeah.
or even sooner, where it's kind of sunk in and that's come back and went, I totally get what she's saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was easier for me to kind of, I struggled with the don't go there, don't, because I'm like, well, what do you mean? I can see the good in that person. Right. You know what I mean? Whereas like the trumpets and the blaring, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm good with that.
You know what it is? You're just even like, naming this right now. Uh, the blaring, what it is that I think I've just learned to recognize that when it's that strong, there's something really big that's going to happen and shift for me. And
Yeah.
I think that that's also my body resisting it of like, no, 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 this is going to be like really big. And are you really ready for that? And like, are you sure we can't just put this off? Like, that's what it feels like to me. So like, so I'll give you an example, like with this person. The feeling was very familiar. That gravitational pull, that connection with this person felt really strong and very like the strongest that I've ever had with anybody, which
Mm.
that in itself felt like, why? Why is this happening? And then also, it felt familiar to a really traumatic situation that I had in a
Mm.
relationship. And so there was the combination of, wow, this is really strong. Like, didn't even have to see the person before I felt it, right? And know what the feeling is. And then the second part is like, man, the last time I had something strong that was familiar, it was a total shit show. I was depressed. I questioned my self worth. Like, it was trauma bonding. Like, it was all the bad things. all at once in one person. And so there is definitely the, I don't want this. I know I don't want this type of suffering in my life. I don't want, I don't welcome this in my life anymore. And no, and the thing is that when we feel these strong callings and pulls, we have a choice.
Hmm.
There is choice in that. If you feel like you're not ready, it's easier to avoid and to be like, I'm just gonna let that go. But the truth is like the let's say the healthiest way of dealing with it is by really sitting with like, what is showing up for me, and what do I need to ask,
Yeah.
or what is it that I don't want, right? And know that you have choice in that. I feel like I've been practicing a lot of choice recently just because of all of the things that have been happening. But um, when that felt so familiar and also frightening, honestly,
Hmm.
I was really like, I'm not, I don't want this in my life. I don't want this. And I kept running into this person, and every time it was the same thing, and I was like, oh, what is happening, and why, like, what is? And then, but like by the third time, it's just like, okay, I see that there's something important here that I'm meant to grow through, learn from. I don't know what it is. It feels really scary. If this is going to be for the highest good of everybody involved, I will surrender to it. And I had a really clear knowing and feeling in that moment that yes, it is. That doesn't mean it doesn't come with hurt and vulnerability. And I think that that's what I want to avoid, right? We all do. Nobody wants to fucking suffer.
Yeah, but you know what's funny about that is again that perspective, right? Of if human beings, as we know psychologically, and hopefully we're evolving because that's what we're talking about, ascending to where you don't have to have something horrific or hurtful happen to grow. But right now we're not there.
Yeah.
Like we like the comfort zone, and so let's face it, you need to be pushed out and put into these situations. And nobody wants heartbreak, but you
Right.
can't love without accepting the possibility of heartbreak.
And I think it's also important to recognize that even though we want to avoid pain, right? It's a very natural thing. Um, Sadness, anger, hurt are all emotions that have information stored in them.
Absolutely.
And if you don't allow yourself to be exposed to those emotions, then you don't get to learn more deeply. And this morning, when I woke up, man, did I get a really clear understanding of what is the thing that is actually hurting me. And I don't like it.
Well, you know what I mean? Nobody does. Like people, and that's why I always laugh because my clients at some point always end up flipping me the bird or telling me I hate you. And I always tell, I told my mom and a good friend, I'm like, I love that. And they're like, why do you love that? I'm like, because it means I've hit they know now,
Yeah.
right? They hit a trigger point where I always say once you see, you can't go back to being blind.
Nope.
It's very difficult to go, okay, I'm just going to shut my eyes because I didn't see it. No, you've seen it. You've seen it. You may not like it, but to me, then that brings the empowerment to you. Because
Right.
if you see it and you know that that's your hurt, well, then I can change it. Versus it's out there and I can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? You know what I mean? And that's awakening to those gifts and then having a different perspective and going, okay, yes, this sucks. And I don't have
Mm-hmm.
to suffer and go through this.
Right. And then there's also another aspect of this that is, if you, especially with like anger and sadness and hurt and betrayal, like those like really deep ones that trigger the most like deepest sense of like potentially unworthiness in ourselves, right? um that there's definitely um part of the information that is in those emotions is understanding, first of all, what is truly beneath the surface of all of this that you're feeling, and what do you need to ask for, what is the request that wants to be made? Or what is the thing that you need to give yourself to satisfy this need that is showing up, right? It doesn't always have to be somebody else has to, fill that need for us. Sometimes it's what do I need to give myself? And that last like super traumatic like relationship that I had years ago, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the I thought I loved myself. This showed me the entire opposite of like, oh no. Apparently I've been basing my self-worth on external validation, on somebody else telling me that I'm worthy, of somebody else telling me that I'm loved, of somebody else telling me that I'm special. That was a hard one. That was a
Well, and I
that was
think, don't you think that's layered though? I think the one misconception people think is I don't love myself and now I do. And what I've tried to teach people too is like it's like a video game. You love yourself a little bit more every time. Do you know what I mean? Like you did love yourself, you just didn't love yourself to the degree, right, you thought you were at maybe.
right.
You know what I mean? And now it's showing you, oh, well, nope, you need this layer now to uncover and love yourself here.
Yeah.
And people, I know when I say that, it's like, what? Oh, yeah. I'm like, it's not black and white. It's
No.
the spiral. It's
Yeah,
the
it's not a
layers.
switch like, oh, I didn't love
Right.
myself. Now I do. Right. No, it's understanding what are the ways in which I have loved myself up till now,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
what is what is still working, what isn't, or what else is it that I need now in this stage of my life for my growth or whatever, that I just didn't know before,
Mhm.
or that I couldn't give myself before, that I didn't understand before, that I do need now. Like how do I tune in into the new parts of myself that are evolving that need a different kind of love or
Right.
more love? And yeah, so I like that. It's the it is you're I think it's the same thing with the energetic upgrades. You're leveling up.
Yeah, and that happens in layers. I mean, I look at my gifts that started when I was going to spiritual life coaching, whatever, and then now I am here. And I've had even friends reflect back to me in the last few months to watch you go from where you were in January to even where you are now. I always tell people like it's a muscle and it's going to take layers. And my physical body went through some crap. I was getting rashes on like the palms of my hands, and I was, like weird stuff was happening that's never happened. And it was like your physical vessel has to also be able to hold that higher energetic frequency. And so there is a shift like we're seeing on the earth. So it was weird for me because I'm like, what is happening? Because, right, your brain wants to go, like, am I allergic to something? Do I need to go to see a doctor? Do I not, even food? I had to get really mindful about food. For a while there, I couldn't eat dairy.
Yeah.
That's never been an issue for me before.
Mm-hmm.
But it was
Yeah.
like, nope, stay, and I was being guided like stay away from that until you kind of get out of this cycle. So it's interesting because everybody thinks, okay, I want that to happen to me. I've had people say that to me. Why doesn't like I'll share something, they'll be like, why can't I do that? Why can't I have the guides do that? I'm like, you can. It just is, it takes time. You first got to get in touch and trust this other knowing.
Yeah.
That's the difficult part. Like even in the human design group, they're just like, that's hard for people to trust and not know.
Right. Yeah. It is. And as part we don't learn that we can trust and know. We certainly don't learn that we can trust and know in ourselves, right? I feel like that's the it's we're more conditioned to look outside of ourselves for guidance than it
Yes.
is for us to see our own divinity.
Exactly.
And
It's like if I can see it out here, then I'll believe in it. But intuition in that works the opposite. You have to know it within to actually end up seeing it without.
yeah, yep,
And so it goes against everything that's innate, and people struggle with that all the time.
yeah. Well, because I think there's this. I think part of it is like there's this inherent like thought that comes up, which is, well, if I have it inside me, I would have already known, right? Or I would have already
Yeah.
identified it, and that's not true.
No.
It isn't. It is not true. I know it. I know the thought seems rational, like that should be the case, right? If I like this is really hard for people to understand. So in one of the things that in my coaching training, I absolutely loved and connected to, so like from the beginning, which this is this philosophy that they have, which is that all people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole.
Yes.
And to me, that felt so, I'm like, yes, I feel that. I've always known that I didn't have those words or that succinct way of putting it. But yes, yes, everybody is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And the being the naturally resourceful, the seeing, knowing that you have everything inside of you that you need is hard, because then you start reflecting on all of the things that you haven't done, and you feel, you start, your brain starts doing this. It's like, well, if I had this, if this is true, or when you learn that it is true, then you start going, I wish I would have done, this differently, or, and it's a futile exercise, right?
Well,
To
that
try.
wasn't your journey.
That wasn't. You didn't know. You can't fault yourself for what you didn't know back then, right? That's just not how it was meant to happen in the order of right? So that was an interesting thing
Well, I
there.
mean, that makes a lot of sense. I remember in the meditation retreat I went to in Vermont, what they told us is everybody is inherently doing the very best they can.
Mhm.
Similar to that, right? And, of course, some people are like, and they're like, you might not think they're doing the best they can, right? But they are.
That one, I feel attacked right now because
Right?
this is why I'm saying that I feel attacked. It's because I know this,
Yeah.
but when your own hurt is triggered
Yep.
and it's unresolved, it is too easy to revert back to this. Screw them. They knew what they were doing.
Well, yeah, right? It's that
They
whole
knew they were
cliche
lying.
of,
They knew they were hurting me. They knew that isn't their best. They can do better. Yes, they can, but in that moment, even though you don't believe it, you don't want to believe it, that was their best.
well, right. And then it goes back to nobody can hurt you unless you let them.
Yeah.
See, so then, well, right. Then we go back to that. This is why my clients are always like,
Oh
mm.
no, I think I have to go now.
Right. That's it. You know what I mean? Because the reality is that's, I took this 8-week course with one of my spiritual mentors. I call her my spiritual mama. She's good friends on the Four Agreements. Have you ever read
Oh
that
my
book?
god.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. I mean, again, this was years ago, and I took the course knowing it was going to crack me open. Like and she knew it, and I purposely wanted it to. And I remember her doing this exercise with us, there was like 10 or 15 of us sitting there, and she was sitting there, and she said, "If I asked you all what you thought of my sweater," and I went around the room, and some of you would say it's beautiful, some of you might say you look fat in it, it doesn't look good. And you all gave me your opinions. And she goes, and you look at those opinions like darts, and each one is being thrown at me, and they fall at my feet. The darts I pick up and stab myself with are the darts I believe about me.
Mm,
So you're not hurting me,
mhm.
I'm hurting me.
Yeah.
Right? It's like that whole don't take anything personal type, thing of, and it was like, oh, you know what I mean? Because she's like, yeah, you may think that I look fat in this sweater, but if I don't think I look fat and that doesn't trigger me, or I don't believe that, that opinion's not going to hurt me.
Mhm.
So really, and circling back to what we were talking about, nobody can hurt you unless you're allowing it and
Unless you allow.
agreeing.
And I tell my kids all the time because obviously, like with kids, it's so much easier. Like the things that kids say without thinking, they just are blurting, right?
Yes.
And then they come home hurt and sad, and it's like I feel like there are weeks when it's constant of like this friend who is close to them or whatever has been like mean to them and whatever, and I have that conversation with them of um, you you can't allow people to rob your peace, right?
Ooh.
For the rest of your life, you will always encounter somebody who says something that you don't like, who says something towards you, and it is your choice
Right.
to allow that to affect who you are, how you see yourself, how you feel, or not. And I'm being very intentional and giving them all of those tools that I have learned for myself just in the past 5 years, 6 years, because I know that part
Mhm.
of our struggle as a whole, right, as human beings, is that we don't learn that we are at choice for a lot of things. We do, we see
Yeah.
it as somebody else hurt me. No. And I know that that's hard. And like for me, the four agreements is like, I feel like it's required reading for everybody,
Yes.
especially if it, like for my clients, I always, and in fact, I just got it from my husband because I'm constantly talking about it. And I'm like, you haven't read it. And I feel like it's important for you to understand a core philosophy for me,
Yes.
but also to see for yourself as you're reading the book, what are the things that are showing up for you when you look at these different examples? What are the different things that are showing up for you when you think about something like, um, don't assume, like, is one where, like, for a lot of people, right? What are the things that we're assuming about others?
Well,
What are
look
the,
at our culture right now, right? Elections are coming up.
yeah,
Not that I even want to go in there, but right, so many people assume things based on one decision.
yes, yep. And so the whole, like, the one that was the hardest for me was definitely the don't take anything personal. And for me, and I think it's for a lot of people, right? There's some things that are easier to go, yeah, okay, I can see where somebody's kind of, said something mean to me. It wasn't about me, it was about them, right? There are other things, let's say more traumatic. So for example, I looked at it from the context of sexual abuse as a kid.
Mhm.
How do I not take it personal that somebody assaulted me when I was a child? That's really hard because that goes at a really deep, unresolved place where you were defenseless. You didn't deserve that. That's not what this is about, right? It is about the issue was not about you being unworthy, being disposable, being any number of things. The part here is this is how this person was trying to exert power over you, and that is not about you. And that's hard. When we get to, right, there's just different examples that we can use to reflect on the lessons. And there are ones that are much harder than others because they go at a much deeper level. Um, Forgiveness, for example. When I was going through finishing coaching training, and there's this one person, this coach I've never met before. It's the first time that I saw him, and I had shared in our session how, like, I can't forgive the people who abuse me. Like that, how could I? Like when it damaged me so much, right? How could I forgive an adult who should have known better than to abuse a child? And I harbored a lot of anger. And what he said to me, Brahm is his name, and I will be forever grateful for him to pursue wanting me to heal from this. Because I was like, in my head, I was like, you don't know who I am. Like, why does this matter to you so much? It just felt like it was such a big thing for him to just want me to resolve this. And he said, because they can no longer hurt you, but it will continue hurting you, only you, if you don't release your anger. And I was like, oh, because I felt that, right? I felt that turmoil that I was holding on to. And there's so many things in our lives, especially things that are traumatic, that have shaped who we are, that
They
have
absolutely
shaped
have.
our life experience, that have shaped our outlook on life, that have shaped, so many different things, right? Um, I think for me, one of those things that was inherently just a part of who I am since I was a kid was understanding that I had choice, first of all, that I didn't have to be like them. I didn't have to be like my abusers. I could be better, much better. I didn't have to be anything like them if I didn't want to be. There's another part that was like knowing then that as a child, I didn't deserve that no child deserves to be abused, period.
Right.
None of them. Um, and then there's this other part that felt more like I can take these experiences that are heavy and awful and make something of it. Like so we talk about alchemizing, right? And that felt very clear to me as a kid, even though obviously I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way. But knowing that I did not, the thought was, I do not have to let these things define who I am.
Hmm.
They can shape me, they have shaped me already, but they don't have to define who I am. I do not have to be a victim to this for the rest of my life. But if I continue holding on to that anger, right, I am complicit in my own suffering. And that's hard for people to accept. That's hard for you to recognize that you are hurting yourself by holding on to this story. Not a story as in like it didn't happen, but this life event that was so um, foundational to who you are, to who you've become, to your life outlook, on and on and on. It's really hard to see that as this just had to be a moment in time, a chapter in my life that I no longer have to carry into my next chapter. Being complicit in your own suffering feels really heavy. It is a part that is really difficult for us to understand, which is having radical self responsibility.
Well, because what you're really doing is going back, if you're looking at it from a quantum and energetic standpoint, you're going back to that pinpoint and taking that energy and bringing it into the present and bringing it into the present and bringing it into the present when it's not happening. It's not happening anymore. I had a whole discussion with someone and saying, like, the whole idea of trauma doesn't exist. Now, I wouldn't say to someone who is traumatic, and I've been through my own traumatic brain injury, right? And she said that to me. She's like, that's a big thing for someone like you to say. And I'm like, because it's not April 20th, 2014 anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's when that traumatic event happened to me. It's not here anymore. And every time I go back and revisit it and bring it back and bring it back, you're creating the trauma, the
Yes.
suffering, because you're bringing that energy back now and it's affecting your present decisions and who you are and all the things. But like you said, it runs so deep that it feels overwhelming and like you're tethered. And that's why I
Yes.
don't, but you've got to learn to, and I think that's the key where you got to learn to grieve and you've got to learn to let go and you've got to do that whole grieving process that nobody likes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because when we don't do that, and I worked with a lot of brain injury survivors who are 11, 12 years out and still crying over their injuries. And they said, I can't get to happy. I said, because you've never grieved.
Mm-hmm.
You can't skip that step and go to happy and pretend it never happened.
Yeah.
And people try, right? Because we hate it. It's deep, it's hard. I don't want to do this. And it was like light bulbs went off.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I feel like, as I've been reflecting on this recently, um, like, how am I how am I still stuck in my stories? It's easier to see when other people are stuck in their stories because if you're
Yep.
paying attention, you're hearing the recurring theme. You're
Yep.
hearing the pattern that they're bringing in into other situations. You're hearing the repetition of stories or repetition of behaviors or repetition of complaints. You're hearing a pattern, right? In ourselves, though, it's a little bit harder. Um, I
Yeah. I
think
always
there's
say when you're inside the bottle, you can't see the label.
yes, yep, for sure. So it's kind of like I've been reflecting on like how have I like I recognize how I've been complicit in my own suffering, but also okay, I can recognize it and be uncomfortable with it and whatever.
I love your facial expressions.
Now it's more like how do I get myself out of that story, right? How do I create a new story that is actually empowering for me, right? And I feel like I've there as I've been reflecting on that and have had energetic upgrades. Um, I've I've learned to see maybe a bigger picture of what haven't I given myself, um, and what do I need to give myself, and what do I have to let go of that isn't mine to bear. So I'll give so because I'm human. And even though I'm an anthropologist and I understand cultural conditioning and I can see behaviors in groups and like I understand how we're all trying to live up to other people's expectations that have been put on us, like all those things, those are things I recognize, right? Um, and I want to reflect, I guess, a little bit on uh, sometimes, when you know your truth. So okay, let me just blurt instead of trying to beat around the bush here. When in our society, right, it's the go-to thing to say, to disparage a woman through their sexuality, right, through their body, right? Best way to ruin a woman's reputation, a girl's reputation, is by calling her a slut, by saying that she's been sleeping around, like all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
We all know this is not news to us. Um, and it's so internalized, right? That if you think about the way that we see and speak of sexual assault victims, right? Um, what is it that, is the first question that people, ask when they say somebody's been raped? What was she wearing, right? Things like that, that are very immediate, that are unconscious, but are deeply ingrained in how we have learned to see these things, that it's a woman's fault for how she was behaving, how she was. There's this exhibit I know that, I don't know if it's still, kind of going around, but it certainly was a few years ago, which was, to allude to this question, to answer this question that is immediate for us. Um, they actually had an exhibit of the different things that rape victims were wearing when they were raped. And it included little 5-year-old girl, dresses. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, this question needs to stop being asked, right? We have to recognize that it is not about women, and this goes back to, like, the don't take anything personal, right? It's so easy to see these things as, this is your fault that this was done to you, because when you take it out of that perspective, you can see the bigger picture of, there's more at work here than that. This is not you deserved this, right? Which is the punitive thing that goes towards women's sexuality, right? You deserve to be punished for this. You deserve to be assaulted because of what you were wearing or what you were doing, what you were saying, because you were drinking, because you were at a bar.
Whatever.
On and on.
Right.
And so, just the same, if you are a woman who is sexually expressive, a woman who feels safe in your sexuality, how it's so easy to go, oh, that's because she was probably assaulted and this is how she, kind of like tries to find validation, right? That's one that I've heard a lot. I heard a lot when I was growing up. And I feel it's still something that a lot of people think, that your traumas dictate kind of how you act, and that the attention you're trying to seek is in response to that, right? That it's unhealed, basically. And something that despite the sexual assault in my life, in my childhood, I when I was sexually intimate with partners, I always felt not shame. I never felt shame about my sexuality. And I felt something very clear, too, that it was healing for a lot of the partners that I was with. I don't say made the mistake, but I tried explaining this just to a partner before. And I said, I feel like a lot of times the partners that I've had, like, they needed something to heal, whether it was their confidence or something. And I just, being with me, and I'm not saying that boastfully, I know but just for the audience. It wasn't like, oh, I'm hot shit, because the way that we can hear somebody saying something like that is like, oh, she thinks she's so special or so hot or whatever. It's not. There was something about me, about my being, my energy, that felt like it was healing. And I didn't know how to explain that. Like at one point, I remember being like a young adult and thinking, is this like me being like a good Samaritan with my body? Like, like quite. I don't know. I was like, wow, that feels weird. I don't think that's quite right, but for some reason, that's what's coming up.
Well, there's an actual thing. I have several friends that are going into sexual healing modalities. And it isn't about the sex per se
Right.
as much as I mean, some of them aren't having sex at all. It's more of a hands-on massage type of thing. It's more of
Right.
the
The body.
energetics.
Right.
Right.
Like healing the sexual wounds to the body because that's where
Right.
it lives, right? And so just recognize. So, anyways, when I shared this with this person, they're like, "Oh, so you just have sex with me because I'm not confident?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like that was not at all the intention behind what I said. I'm just trying to explain to you just something that I've just learned, right?" But he took it very personal, and I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna let that one go." And just more and more, especially like in the past few months, as I've done different regressions or I've done, or different things have just come up for me of understanding like, man, the more that I tune into my sexuality, the more that I release the shame, the more that I tune in into the fact that I am a free, loving person, um, that it is okay to have multiple relationships. Romantic and sexual, that it is okay, that there is nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just that the way that we have learned to see these things unfortunately comes from a very shameful place, a place of sin, a place of not and
Judgment.
with this in going into so many different kind of directions, but the more that I have felt safe in my own body, the more that I have recognized this isn't mine and I don't have to drag this on with me. What does this mean for me? How do I bring this into relationships? And to your point, right, it doesn't have to be sexual. Sometimes even just being with a person and helping them talk through those things, right,
Mhm.
through those sexual wounds is enough. And learning for myself that part of this learning for me is understanding that one of the gifts that I have is that I like taboo subjects. and I enjoy talking about them because it frees us. When we talk
Right.
about the shameful stuff, the things that we have learned to associate as shameful, that's the way to get rid of shame, to undo shame, is by exposing shame, is by talking about shame, it's by it's we have
It's
to
like
start.
everything.
Huh? Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
everything. Any subject, in order for you to get rid of it, you got to talk about it. You got to see it. You
You
got to
have to
honor it.
expose it, you have to see it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so just understanding almost like I don't have to carry this with me anymore. And importantly, this makes so much sense as to why I've been able to say coach a lot of men on their relationships and do it well, to where like I can actually see that they've improved because they're receptive, right? And I was like, well, that's a gift, right? I was telling my husband this the other day, and I was like, I know where I really want to go in my business next. I know how I want to, what I want to speak to, and how I want to market that. But I don't know, something feels like a little bit off about this. And he's like, in yourself? And I was like, no, I think it's in the way that people are going to perceive it. And he's like, okay. So we kind of like work through it. And the conclusion to all of that was, he's like, you are a very sexual and sensual person, and you can't be afraid of that. You can't be afraid of showing up in that way,
Mhm.
because that's actually who you are. First of all, that's a very authentic aspect of you, a very powerful aspect of who you are. And it's really not your responsibility how other people perceive it, if they perceive it negatively, right?
That's a for agreement.
Yeah, I know.
Even if they, and the key to that, just a side note, the for agreement also is like if people are praising you, you also don't need to take that personally.
Yes,
Because we always put it in a negative sandlight and
That's
say if
right.
people are saying bad, but it's also if they're like, you're accolades, you're amazing, that also is not yours to take.
Yeah, yeah,
It doesn't matter. So that's an important part of that agreement to know. It can be negative, but it also can be positive, and none of it is any of your business, really.
yeah. And I'm gonna say how because I think when you hear that perspective, like it could also be positive. I think the first thing that comes up in your brain, right, is like, well, why wouldn't I take that personal if it's positive, right? I'm going to give you a counterexample to that. Think about being really good at something when you're a kid, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and there's this expectation. So like, let's say you're great academically, and there's this, like, you're praised for like, how smart you are and like how great you do in school and all this stuff. That actually becomes pressure. You
Yes,
have internalized the praise, and if that is no longer serving you, you still already internalized it, right? So
but
so
right.
there's a little bit of like there's nuance in there that is important to recognize. Um, but also it's really about not internalizing the feedback that is coming from outside of yourself, because what actually matters is what you're tuning into in yourself. Like, what are the things that I believe about myself? That's what matters, right? So regardless of it being positive or negative,
Yeah,
that's
the
all that
darts.
matters, right? Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, and people are probably thinking like, well, what does this have to do with ascending and awakening? It's like because as you ascend and awaken, this stuff becomes exposed. You can't not look at yourself from within and see whatever stories, whatever traumas, whatever hurts, wherever you're holding your self back, wherever you feel you're unworthy, where you're not divine, where you're not sovereign, where you're not, loved. All of that is going to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is part of the ascending and awakening. You don't get to like bypass and just go, okay, I don't have to look at that, because it's really about coming into your wholeness as this being. And we are so fractured, a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And not just are we so fractured, and I like that word, and it's a word that I used a lot before. Um, Fragmented, fractured,
Yes.
because really what is important is about how do we make ourselves whole, right? Um, it's about all of ooh, all of these different parts of ourself matter. All of these different parts of ourself must be expressed. All of these different parts of ourself belong to who we are. And holding ourselves, making ourselves whole, right, is the bigger picture, right, of who we are. It's the totality of who we are. And you cannot feel fulfilled, whole, if you're only expressing one part of yourself and denying yourself another one, right? Neglecting a part of yourself that is just as important. And I feel like that's been a thing for me, is like that, as well as like the, let's say, I don't like talking about energies in terms of masculine and feminine. I think that actually does us a disservice, and I'm the more that I'm in kind of spiritual spaces, especially ones, I'm just going to say ones that are geared towards women, there's this incompleteness that I feel in terms of how we see the world and our interconnectedness. And so for me, the separateness of how we see energy sometimes, like, it really bothers me, and I know that it bothers me because I feel so whole and balanced in my energies, right? But for the sake of just talking about it in the way that people are accustomed to, right? I have a very strong feminine energy and a very strong masculine energy. They're both strong. Um, and it makes sense reflecting on the kind of people that I attract into my life, whether as friends or whether as partners or whether as clients, that they're very strong in their energies. Uh,
Mhm. Makes sense.
in whatever spectrum. This
Mm-hmm.
it's their energy is strong and there's something about them that feels unresolved, right? And I think the more that I do my own inner work, the more that I attract the people that are like that, whatever it is that's happening for her. uh, I want that. I don't know what that is. Like sometimes it's like not knowing how to identify what is it that feels like I I feel like this is this person is an example of, but I want whatever it is, and I just don't know what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the self trust, right? The more that I trust myself, the more that I show up differently in the world, right? The
For
more that
sure.
I trust my own divinity, for example, um, the more that I show up differently in the world. The more that I trust my sexuality as being inherently good and beautiful and healing, the more that other people feel that and want that for themselves, right? Freeing yourself from the shame of your sexuality is a pretty fucking big deal for most of us, right? Because most of
Yeah.
us have grown up with very limited ideas about what that should look like or not. And even in relationships, if you think about it, like what are the things that you're allowed to ask for
Mm-hmm.
in sex? Just sex alone, right? Um, the fact that we feel ashamed even communicating our desires, even to a partner, like all of those things affect us, and
Mm-hmm.
we can ignore it, right? Because it's easier to ignore than to just have the conversation, because you're afraid that if you have the conversation you'll be rejected and it's not going to be received well, right? And I feel like that's where I'm like, man, I've honed my communication in that way, and also like helping people to communicate that to their partners. Then I'm like, oh, this makes total sense to who I've always been. It's just that I've been afraid of showing up more fully in that energy because of how I know that people tend to perceive it. Now, that's still an assumption, right? Maybe I completely show up as the fully sexual, sensual, beautiful person, loving person that I am. And it's the complete opposite, right? I'm making an assumption there that it's going to be negative.
Well, because that's what we're trained to do.
Yeah.
We live in a culture, that trains us, right? You deserve a break. Everything is, it's much easier for us to look at things negatively than it is to look at that whole analogy, white horse, black horse, white wolf, black wolf, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever one you feed will win, right? And it's like, that's just how we're trained, is always look for the negative instead of where's the positive. What if I show up and I make a huge change? What if I show up and all these people are actually drawn to me? What if I and I you know and I see that in a lot of whatever you want to call us, light workers, all the things, right? There's a million titles for all the things that we do, star seeds, healers, whatever. It doesn't really matter, but there's always that fear of showing up authentically as we are and being judged. And I think it comes back to, you're going to be judged one way or another anyways. So I read this book the other day, and this guy kind of said, when he was talking about his writing and when he came out as a writer, and he said, I had people telling me I sucked as a writer and basically you should die. And then I had people saying you're a genius, right? And his point to was, you need to have a thick skin to understand both are correct in the fact that it doesn't matter. My writing is getting both of you to think and engage.
Yeah.
So your innate opinion of me is really doesn't matter. I got you to think and read and maybe open your mind in a short way, and that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really great perspective because for me, because I'm like, yes, because let's face it, you are gonna get haters. You're gonna get people. There's a billions of people on the planet. Not everybody's gonna like you. Not everybody's gonna vibe with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if anybody's gonna have an opinion anyways, well then why am I not coming out as my fullest expression?
Right.
So it's kind of, when we break it down logically, for me it's kind of silly and go, why do I do that?
Because it's
I mean,
bullshit.
you know what I mean? It's like, why?
Again, this goes back to like I'm complicit in my own suffering, right? This
Right.
I am
And it
doing
it
this
does. It
because
goes back to, I mean, I had someone send me this TikTok of this guy and I loved it, where he said, you could come out as an angel and people are still going to complain that your wings are too loud.
mm,
Flap them anyway. Meaning, like, there'll always be someone out there who's going to find something. And so, right, back to it not taking anything personally. So but I think getting to know yourself, that becomes easier,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And going, again, I'm not going to pick up that dart if you say I'm sexually wrong because I don't feel that way.
Right.
That dart's going to lay on the floor.
I think another thing too is and I've been so, especially like this past few weeks, like really in tune with the partner that I have, and recognizing like how this is the person that I needed in my life. And I knew that I had, every time I explained like how I met him and when I met him and what was happening in my life and what was I wanting of the universe? What was I wanting out of my life? What was I co-creating in a way that I didn't realize? And you know, this person was exactly what I needed, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But as more time has gone on, really understanding just how much this person is exactly the person that I needed in my life, right? And I feel like, as in the society that we live, he always understood that my sexuality, my sexual expression was important. So like even in our vows, we didn't. There's not a vow of faithfulness because we already understood that this is going to mean something different for us, right, than it does for most people. And I feel like the more that I've asked for what I need in my relationships, in my sexuality, the more that it has provided um, I would say a context for us to grow individually as well as to grow in our relationship, to understand like, okay, what are the things that are showing up for you, what are things that are showing up for me, what are things that are showing up that are ours and that are not ours, right? Which are the societal things, cultural things, and which are the individual things, and why are different things showing up? And having a partner to work through all of those different things has been pretty cool. And I told him last year, I said, I'm gonna say it the way that it wants to be said. Please take it the best way possible, but man, you really stepped up to the plate on this, and you've leveled up so much to, oh my gosh, something that's coming up that I saw yesterday was, um, it was this meme, or it was like, I it was like, I am not coming down from from being top shelf just because you can't reach it. So like, and it resonated. I probably messed up the wording, but top shelf, and like, you have to come to where
Yeah.
I am, right? Um, I don't think there's ever the expectation that he would, because we have to accept people exactly as they are, and we cannot expect to want them to grow, learn, change, shift, transcend the way that we do, because that's not their path. They have their own path, right? And yet, having seen him do that, and knowing that I'm a catalyst for that change, for that evolution for him too, right? Um, it's still something to be very grateful for, because I'm like, man, truly, in order for me, especially like being in relationship with someone, it's a lot harder for you to be the fullest expression of yourself if your partner cannot see or be with that,
Right.
right? And so just feeling that gratitude for like, oh, I know that where I'm meant to go is like uncomfortable for me, but I'm so grateful that I have a partner that understands where I'm gonna go and that supports that, and that is with me on that journey, and helping me figure out what is the crap that is coming up that is trying to keep me from being more fully into that. So yeah, and I'm always curious for people who are elevating, ascending, upgrading, leveling up. how are their partners like doing with all of this? Because it can be a lot to see your partner shift in ways that you do not understand, that they
A
probably
lot
don't
of them
understand.
aren't. There's a lot. I know, and just from my people around me, I'm seeing a lot more divorce right now than I am
Really?
coming together.
Oh wow.
And you know, and in a lot of ways, that was kind of, I don't want to say predicted, but shared because, you know, people are coming into their own. And so who you were when you got with them and who, you know, if you is changing and people that's where it all goes back to getting to know yourself. You know what I mean? And I watched this show a long time ago that talked about scientifically humans date based on needs.
Mm-hmm.
We don't date anything else. So if you are like a single mom who can't afford and you're going to find a partner who can provide you a home and money, or you know what I mean. So whatever you're lacking, if especially if you don't have some of the five essential basic needs, you know, food, shelter, those types of things, you're going to find a partner that provides that until you outgrow those needs, and then you find a different partner because now those needs have been met, you've moved on, maybe you have your own job, you got your own place, and you're like, okay, I don't need that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you look at that, you know, when you know yourself, and that's why what they were saying is when you don't need anything, you pick better partners
Mm.
because now you're dating from an essential of it's a want, not a need. It's like for
Yeah.
me when I date, I don't, if somebody says I need you or mm-mm,
Yeah.
I don't want you to need me.
Yeah.
I want you to choose me and we can co-create together. But if you need me, there's an imbalance here because I don't need you.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I want you. I'm
Yeah.
choosing you, but I don't need you. I'm okay alone.
But if you can't also hear that I don't need you, that in itself is something that I cannot
Oh,
do.
that's huge.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, we could do a whole other podcast on that. You know what I mean? Because that's something that's going on right now. I mean, and I agree with you. I think a lot of people are seeing relationship changes and sexuality changes are happening big time now. You know, meaning like the shame. I know a lot of friends are suddenly taking one of my friends in Flagstaff. She was doing health coaching and now she's helping men overcome porn addictions. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what? Never in a million years. You know what I mean? So you're seeing this transformation of sexuality and everything as this awakening and ascending is happening because it's our prana, it's our life force energy.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and I feel like so this is a conversation that I had with our friend Haley, which was, man, I feel that clarity so much right now that it is in focusing on men and supporting men um, through their transition, right? Through
Yes.
their healing, through their transcendence. That feels so freaking clear to me, and again, like it's the thing that is like just fortunately, like the more that I've been working on this, the less loud it is in my brain. But it's like, well, how are people going to perceive that? And I'm like, and again, like that's not my business. Like
None of your
the
business.
the men who feel like that's something that is important to them to work through, right? And that feel that I can help them through that, right? That I can support them through that. That I can help them find more meaningful relationship or whatever.
She's had a great response. And she was, and this is a girl who also had issues, her own, and I won't go into her, you know, her private stuff, but so this was a big you know, we went to school together and stuff and I was like, whoa, she's a dear friend and this was not something I ever saw her doing or her, you know what I mean, but for her to doing it, she's had a great response from men.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, of course there's a few that, you know, there's always
Oh yeah,
bad
there's
apples,
always.
you know what I mean, but she's learned to deal with it and now it just doesn't affect her anymore and she's like whatever, but she's been surprised at the response, so I
Yeah,
think
learning to discern who's actually wanting to work with you for the right reasons. Yes,
right, she had to
absolutely,
do that.
for
So,
sure.
and you know, the
Um,
less that's happening apparently less and less now, but there was a period of learning, like you said, and I'm like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
needed now. It's needed.
It
So
is. I think it's kind of like we're at this point where we all recognize that we need healing, and there's
yeah,
different ways of doing that, right? There's only different modalities to do that. There's different people to do that with. And I was telling when I was telling my partner about this, I said, um, this feels really clear to me, and I just have to stop getting in the way of that because of all of the crap that comes up in my brain. This feels very clear. And, sometimes it's not just about the clarity about what you do want to do or what you're meant to do or what the next step is. It's also having very strong clarity, going back to like the energetic kind of like pushing, right? The antagonistic energy, right? It's being very clear about what you don't want or what
Right.
doesn't feel right.
Right.
And I've coached women and I've been in a lot of like women's empowerment spaces, and there's something that just feels like that's not my space. That is not my space. And I have the shared experience as a woman and understand the things in the growth that they're looking for. And I'm clearly generalizing, obviously, and
Yeah. Yeah.
saying in this particular way, um, but because I've been in that context enough, like I know now, I have an understanding of like what is being sought, how it's being, what is, well, let's say what's out in the market, like of like how these needs are being satisfied, what is available, and it just and how it's talked about. And for me, I'm like, all of this makes sense to me because of my lived experience. But I know that that is not the space that I need to be in. That doesn't mean that I can't coach women, but there's just something that at a larger scale feels like this is about leaning into the male masculine energy and helping them heal that. And my husband says something really important. He's like, but you realize that by doing that, you're also helping women. You are empowering women to be in better relationships with men. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Well, I think we get held up on the
right.
details. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like we get held up on the details of men. It's like, listen, we're just helping each other.
Yes, exactly. We're just human beings, regardless of the sex or gender or
Right.
sexuality. We are human beings who are looking for relationships that feel healthy and good and satisfying, not just in a physical or love relationship, but in like all different capacities, right? And this thing that we learn about like people, it's very romanticized and glamorized, and I hate it. But how somebody's supposed to complete us.
Well, that's what I said. That's a whole
No,
need based.
they're you 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 find somebody, you seek somebody who complements you, not somebody who completes you. Nobody is going to completely you. You That's your work. That's your own work. So yeah, so that's kind of like, and energetically part of what I'm feeling is so much of, I feel like had a pretty strong sexual energy anyways, but like I feel that even more now, like the more that I step into that, the more that it's just freeing up all these other things, and helping me be more clear
Yeah.
too, which I feel like is really good. But there's also, that's kind of one side of things too, like the I think for me another part of like the energetic upgrade that's been happening is it's physiologically, is the best way that I can describe, like in my body, like how is my body feeling differently. It's not just like my soul, my spirit. It's
Mm.
also embodied, right? How do I feel like those changes, those shifts have been in my body recently? And I feel like when I'm noticing the things that are really like starting to shift me, sometimes completely without expecting them, which those are the hardest ones because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared for this, but okay, we're just gonna surrender in this moment. Um, there, it feels like this shaking or vibration in my body that feels
Mm.
very clear when it's happening. Um, and I feel like my body sometimes like tries to resist that because now it knows. Now it's kind of learned to recognize this pattern of like how this experience is for me, right? And different people have different experiences. Like for some it's more vision, for one, but for me it's very like there's like this really strong, tingle is not the right word, but like vibration
Mm.
that feels like it. And it's like the other like analogy that sometimes comes in is like I'm plugged back into my source. I'm plugged back into the source of the universe. I'm plugged back into this like bigger thing. And it does feel like a like I don't know why that imagery comes up, but it's like, oh, there we go, like the source. This is, now I'm Where is that? What was that animated movie? CGI with the blue people.
Avatar?
Yes. You know how that's just, I don't know, for some reason, like that was just what came up. But yeah, so as I'm noticing different things that have shifted, in different capacities, like I feel that like that vibration. And again, it goes back to like, I don't know what this is, and this is like, I can't allow my head to get in the way of, certainly not from a, what's the word that wants to come up, um a diagnostic perspective, right? Or a medicalized, I'm gonna say, perspective of like, oh my gosh, this we have learned to see this as, again, like, the hearing, like schizophrenia, or like something bad is happening or something wrong is happening, right?
Mm.
And I know that my brain sometimes is like, it wants to get in the way. It's just that at this point I'm just so practiced at going like, oh my god, let that go.
Well, that's the best thing to do. I mean, you get logical. And they used to tell us that even with clients is like, just, yeah, notice it. That's mindfulness, but don't attach to it, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, okay, now you can go sit in the back seat now.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That was kind of the analogy they gave us. Like, you go sit in the back, I'm driving now, with
Mm-hmm.
fear or anything else. Cause it's like, we want to try to logically explain things and sometimes you can't.
No.
And you'll notice that. And that's important. So, I mean, I think it's important to be able to be in tune with your body, and you'll notice these as your upgrades come in, which kind of leads to this last question.
Mhm.
Since we're wrapping things up, it's been an hour and 30 minutes
Oh
already.
wow.
I know, right? We could go on for hours, trust me. So that being said, what piece of wisdom or warning would you share with people who are just now starting their awakening or ascensions?
So trusting and allowing are two words
Mm.
that keep coming up almost like mantra for me, and I feel like it's what often wants to be shared with others who are also in that like in between space of starting off and like not knowing how to trust this.
Yeah.
Um, Trust that you are being held and led to where you need to go, even if you don't understand it. You don't have to understand it. And allow, and I say allow because truthfully, I try to remind myself to surrender, but
Mm.
sometimes surrendering feels like a much bigger, deeper world and word. I explained this last night to a group where surrender to me feels like, the image that comes up for me is letting go backwards, like it's a trust exercise. Oh, excuse me, sorry.
Yeah.
It's a trust exercise, and I just want to let my entire body go into the abyss of the world, um, and trust that I will be safe. I'm not there yet. And so, because even though I remind myself to surrender, particularly my body, I feel like that with my body, that comes up a lot of like, surrender, just let go. Just let go, because I feel the resistance in my body. And I know that for me, feeling unsafe in my body is something that has kept me from a lot of things. And so I recognize that when I intuitively remind my body to surrender, it relaxes a little. And
Mm.
so for me, that's a word that's become important. So you have to also figure out like, trust whatever words want to come up to support you, but also maybe play with the words to see which one supports you best too. Like, it can be either one. It doesn't have to all be intuitive. Sometimes it's just, just being curious. So my other supportive word when I don't feel like I'm ready to fully surrender, but I want to release and let go of, is allow. Allow for whatever is happening in the moment, for whatever you're hearing, for whatever changes are happening. Release a little bit of the resistance, let go. If you have to, let it go. If that helps you to sing your way through it, do it. I have done that before. It does work because it gets you out of your head and more into your body and your energy. um, do that. Like, allow yourself to play with what feels the most supportive for you, because that can be in so many different ways. But trust that you really, when you start listening, when you start trusting that path, you are being held by something far greater than yourself that you don't have to understand. You will at some point. Um, but you are being held and moved in the direction that you need to be. And then I tell you, that can be really scary when you're used to just being functioning through your brain alone. It's a whole different way of being. Um, and it doesn't matter. You ignore it, it's going to persist. It's going to persist until you let go and you allow, and you trust and you allow. If you have to repeat that mantra to yourself, you do that. A mantra that has been really important for me, that actually started as a kind of almost divine download in response to a really huge anxiety that I was experiencing with my kids. Um, so the story briefly is, I homeschooled after the pandemic for a few years, and the first day of school that my son was going to go back to school, the day before there's a massive shooting, and I was just so absolutely terrified for my kids' safety, I was really struggling with, is this the right thing to do? Am I putting my kid in danger? Like, the guilt that I felt was really horrific. And my body was just completely hijacking me. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to function this way, like every day. Like, I can't do that to myself.
Mhm.
Um, and so the next day after I dropped him off, same thing, like super huge, like wave of anxiety on the verge of panic attack. Um, and I was just like like sitting in the car, just breathing hard through it and going, please, please just show me what I need right now. And I had this really clear download, which was, you are divinely blessed, divinely guided, divinely protected. And it felt so peaceful and clear that that was true. And every time I've offered that to other people, they're like, oh, that feels good. Use that. Take that if that's helpful, or find a mantra that's going to be supportive of you and who you are. That to me felt very clear. When I shared it with my family, they're like, oh my God. So now that they've adopted it too, that our family is divinely blessed, divinely guided, divinely protected. And I use that to remind myself that I am held by something
Mhm.
much greater than myself. But that I also, my divine blessing is trusting in my own divinity, knowing that I am not separate from that, that there is not anything outside of myself that is greater than what I have within. It's just connecting the dots between the two, like connecting the path between the two, being the bridge between the two, right? Um, it's all part of our wholeness, our
Mhm.
individual wholeness as well as our collective wholeness. And the more that we move into that, the more clearly we will see. Yeah,
Okay.
that's how I felt. Okay. Yeah, sometimes when I'm
No, that is
listening,
beautiful because
when stuff
I,
like
you know,
that comes out, I'm
and
like, I remember that I am a vessel for what needs to be said. It's not me saying it.
no, and that's true, and that's important for people to share. And I think if I would just add, if you guys are struggling with the word trust, I, with my people and what I've learned is adaptation. How can I adapt?
Hmm.
Because adapting isn't so much a surrender and a trust. Because the more you adapt, the more you learn to trust.
Yeah,
You know, and
makes
it takes
sense.
baby steps. So don't beat yourself up if you're not right there and go, yeah, I've heard all these things, and I can't do it.
Right.
It's in the baby steps you'll get there.
Right. And back to, like, find the word. If trust doesn't feel like the right word, or surrender or allow, if those don't
Mhm.
feel like the right words, find the words that
That work for
support
you.
you,
Yeah.
right?
That's what's important. It's got to
You,
be about your journey.
yes. So one of the four agreements is be impeccable with your word. And it's really interesting, right? When we reflect on the things that have been important to us in our lives, for me, one of those things has always been this: the truth shall set you free. and know thyself have
Hmm.
been two that always, since the first time that I heard them, they felt so true. Like I know that there's some power to this, right? So like being impeccable with your word, like words have energy, the
Hmm.
meanings behind words, the energy that you have, that you feel towards certain words, positive or negative. Dig into that, right? So I love doing wordplay and like looking at the etymology of words,
Hmm.
because there's a sometimes there's a lot of there's a lot of meaning um, that we don't recognize behind the words, especially when it comes to like the root of words. So I like doing that as an exercise too, of like, this word feels right, this one doesn't, but what does it really mean? What is the root of this word? Um, and like, because language changes over time, right? And so the meaning of words sometimes changes. And so playing a little bit with that, it has also been very supportive for me of like, I need the right words. I need the right words for them to match the energy that I'm intending, and I need the right words to support the intention that I'm setting out in the world, that the intention that I'm setting out with a project, the intention that I'm setting out with a relationship, right? Like I feel very strongly about the power of words, the power of our words, right? It's like spells and magic, right? It's like it's the thing. If you word things, if you clearly work through what it is that I want to put into the world and put it through my words, that feels very clear to me that I'm articulating what I actually want,
Hmm.
right? What I want to co-create with life, right? What I want to co-create with a partner, what I want to co-create with my kids. So be intentional with the words that you're using and just making sure that they're supportive for what you actually want. Yeah.
Thank you, my friend.
Oh, I love you.
I,
We
I
always
appreciate
have
spending this time with
such
you.
amazing conversations. Like, uh,
Guys, thank you guys for watching this or being here. And as always, stay curious, stay empowered, and keep shining your unique light. I'll see you in the next one. Love you
bye.
guys. Hold on. Okay, I think we're good. Let me see.